$1,000 Life in Australia, SX, Drugs, and Lonely Men. You won't believe this. Australia, the land of stunning beaches, vibrant cities, and endless adventure. The place where Instagram photos come to life, and everyone seems to be living their best life under the sun. But let me throw a bombshell your way. Could you really live here on just $1,000 a month? Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? You probably think I'm kidding, but the truth is, it's not as impossible as it may seem. Or is it? That's the paradox we're diving into today. When we think about Australia, we imagine golden sandy beaches, waves crashing on the shore, and an endless summer. The iconic Sydney Opera House, the Great Barrier Reef, and those cute koalas are all part of the dream. It's marketed as paradise, right? But what they don't show you in those glamorous brochures is the hidden reality of living in this country, especially when you're trying to survive on a budget. Sure, Australia is beautiful. It's known for its stunning natural landscapes, a laid-back lifestyle, and a reputation for being one of the most developed countries in the world. But living here isn't as simple as it looks. The truth is that despite the beauty and all the perks that come with living in Australia, the cost of living is no joke. In fact, for many people, it's a real struggle to make ends meet, especially if you're living on a tight budget. Renting a tiny apartment in cities like Sydney or Melbourne will cost you a fortune, and the price for basic necessities isn't exactly cheap either. But here's the kicker. Despite the high costs, there's a whole community of people living in Australia on far less than you'd think. Some are surviving with as little as $1,000 a month. How? Well, that's the big question, and that's what we're going to find out. You see, this isn't just about stunning landscapes or the Aussie way of life. It's about real, raw living, the kind that doesn't come with the shiny filter of a travel influencer's post. It's about asking the tough questions and digging into the reality of life here, beyond the polished tourism images. So, let me ask you this. Is Australia really as dreamy as it's made out to be? Or is it all just an illusion? You know, the kind of dream that looks perfect from a distance. But once you get closer, you realize it's a little harder to grasp than you thought. It's easy to get caught up in the picture-perfect image of Australia. The sunshine, the beaches, and the picture-perfect lifestyle. But the truth is, living here isn't always about catching the next wave or sipping cocktails by the beach. The fact is, the cost of living is one of the biggest hurdles that people face in Australia. That's where the story gets interesting. You see, the reality is a bit more complex. The balance between earning enough to survive and having the lifestyle that you dream of is tricky. For most people, Australia's charm doesn't come with a price tag that fits a budget of just $1,000 a month. But if you dig deep enough, you'll find that it's not entirely impossible. What if I told you that you could survive on that amount? But it would require sacrifices and a shift in how you view the Australian dream. Australia isn't just the beaches, the sunshine, and the endless fun. It's also about the struggles, the isolation, and the tough decisions you need to make a life here. In this video, we're not talking about the glamorous side of life. We're getting down to the gritty, real side of what it means to live in Australia on a shoestring budget. Can it be done? Let's see. This isn't your usual travel guide filled with surface-level tips. I'm here to take you through the highs and lows of living on $1,000 in Australia. The question is, can you live the dream on a budget, or will you be forced to face the harsh realities of life in one of the most expensive countries on Earth? Stick around to find out, because you don't want to miss what happens when you start to peel back the layers of paradise. When I first arrived in Australia, I had the typical image in my mind: pristine beaches, perfect weather, and a sense of freedom that I thought would last forever. I imagined myself living the Aussie dream, surfing the waves, enjoying the sun, and making memories with new friends. The country was painted as the ultimate paradise, a place where life was easy, fun, and full of adventure. But as I settled in, the reality turned out to be far different than what I had imagined. At first, it seemed like I was living the dream, but soon enough I realized that living in Australia on a budget was not as simple as it seemed. The cost of living here is ridiculously high, especially in the big cities. Renting even a small place in Sydney or Melbourne can cost you a small fortune, and don't get me started on food prices. As much as I tried to stick to my budget, it quickly became clear that Australia's lifestyle comes with a hefty price tag. The dream that I thought I could afford was quickly slipping out of reach, and it made me wonder if I was the only one struggling to make it work. But it wasn't just about money. Australia has a culture that's as unique as its landscape. There's an overwhelming presence of casual relationships, a heavy party culture, and a curious attitude toward sex and drugs. These things aren't hidden away. They're part of everyday life. You see people partying hard, chasing thrills, and using substances in ways that aren't always talked about in the brochures. It's a side of Australia that many people don't see, but it's everywhere. And it affects how people live, interact, and even survive. As I dug deeper into life here, another reality hit me: loneliness. Despite the fact that you're surrounded by millions of people, it can be surprisingly hard to feel truly connected. I've had countless conversations with locals and backpackers who feel isolated despite living in one of the most vibrant countries in the world. And it's not just the expats. Even Australians themselves experience loneliness, something I wasn't expecting in such a lively and bustling place. So, is the Aussie dream really all it's cracked up to be? Or is it just an illusion? The truth is, living in Australia comes with challenges that many people don't talk about. Sure, there are moments of beauty and excitement, but there's also the struggle to keep your head above water financially. The wild party culture that sometimes leaves you feeling empty, and the isolation that creeps in when you least expect it. This documentary is based on my personal experiences living in Australia, combined with research and stories from locals, backpackers, and other expats who've lived the same reality. I'm here to tell you the truth about what life in Australia is really like, beyond the tourist brochures and Instagram posts. We'll dive into the highs and the lows, from the financial hurdles to the social struggles, and explore what it really means to live here. So, let us find out together. Is the Aussie dream everything it is cracked up to be? Or is there a darker side to paradise? The price of paradise. Can you live here for $1,000? Australia is often marketed as a dream destination, a place full of sun, sand, and adventure. But here's the truth. Living here on a budget, especially with just $1,000 a month, is a huge challenge. The cost of living in Australia is high, and it is something you will quickly realize as soon as you try to make it work on a tight budget. You may think that you can live the Aussie dream without spending a fortune, but the reality is quite different. Let's start with the basics. Rent. In cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, the cost of housing is outrageous. If you're lucky enough to find a place for $1,000 a month, it'll probably be a shared room in a flat or a small, basic apartment in the suburbs. Rent in Sydney alone can easily cost upwards of $2,000 for a one-bedroom apartment. For those on a budget, a room in a shared house can cost anywhere from $150 to $400 per week, depending on the area. In major cities, it is tough to find something affordable unless you're willing to live far from the city center or share your space with multiple people. And if you want to live close to the action, whether that's the beach or a bustling neighborhood, you can pay a premium. But it's not just rent that takes a huge chunk of your budget. Let's talk about food. Eating out in Australia is expensive. A meal at a casual restaurant can cost anywhere from $10 to $20. And if you're out on the town, that price can go up even more. Of course, you can save money by cooking at home, but groceries aren't exactly cheap either. The price of basic items like bread, milk, and vegetables can add up quickly. A simple grocery shop could set you back 40 hurriers to $60 for just a few days of meals, and that doesn't even include snacks or drinks. Transportation is another significant expense. If you're in the city, public transportation can help you get around without needing a car, but it still costs money. A monthly public transport pass in Sydney can cost around $150, depending on how much you travel. And if you're living outside the main cities or in smaller towns, you'll likely need a car, which means you'll need to budget for petrol, gas, insurance, and possibly car maintenance. Petrol prices fluctuate, but they usually hover around $1.30 to $1.50 per liter in most parts of Australia. And let's not forget about social expenses. Going out to socialize is a big part of Australian culture, and whether you're enjoying a cold beer at a bar or heading out to a festival, it all adds up. A night out with friends can easily cost $50 or more, especially when you factor in drinks and entry fees for clubs or events. Socializing in Australia is definitely a fun way to spend time, but it's also expensive. Now, the question remains, can you really live in Australia for $1,000 a month? Well, it's possible, but it requires some serious budgeting and flexibility. The key is knowing where to live and how to adjust your expectations. For instance, living in Sydney, one of the most expensive cities in the world, would make it nearly impossible to live comfortably on $1,000 a month. However, in smaller cities or towns, your budget stretches much further. Cities like Hobart in Tasmania, for example, offer much lower rent prices. You could find a decent room for around $200 to $300 per week, and groceries and transportation costs would also be cheaper than in the big cities. In rural areas or smaller towns, you could stretch that $1,000 quite a bit further. In places like Adelaide, you could potentially cover rent, food, and basic transportation within that budget, but it would still require some careful planning. I spoke to a few locals and backpackers who have lived in Australia on tight budgets, and they all had to get creative with how they spent their money. One backpacker I met in Melbourne told me she lived in a share house with 5 other people just to keep her rent down. She shared a room and contributed to the household by helping with groceries and cooking. Her rent was just under $300 a week, and she kept her expenses down by living frugally and only going out when she could afford it. Another traveler in Brisbane shared how he worked multiple part-time jobs just to cover his living expenses. His rent alone was about $400 a week, and he worked a few shifts in a cafe and another in a warehouse. While he didn't have much free time, he managed to get by on his $1,000 a month by cutting back on things like socializing and non-essential purchases. It's not glamorous, but it's doable, he said. It's all about finding ways to make it work. These examples show that living on $1,000 in Australia is possible, but it comes with its challenges. You won't be living in luxury or taking weekend trips to exotic destinations. Instead, it's about making the most of your money, adjusting to a simple lifestyle, and being flexible with your choices. If you're willing to live in smaller towns, share living spaces, and work multiple jobs, you can definitely make it work. But the real question is, how sustainable is this lifestyle in the long run? If you're okay with making constant sacrifices and living on the edge of your budget every month, it's doable. But it's not easy, and it's not glamorous. Australia may be paradise in many ways, but it's important to remember that paradise comes with a price, and it's one that's not always affordable for everyone. In the end, living in Australia for $1,000 a month is possible, but it's a lifestyle that requires sacrifice, careful planning, and a willingness to live outside the traditional comforts many expect when they think of this country. If you're up for the challenge, it can work. But if you're dreaming of living the high life in Australia, that $1,000 budget is going to feel like a struggle every single month. The glamour versus reality of living in a big city. When most people dream of living in Australia, they picture the big cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. These cities are what we see in the movies, the postcards, and on social media. They're full of life, bustling with energy, and always on the go. Iconic landmarks like the Sydney Opera House, the Great Ocean Road, and Melbourne's coffee culture make these cities seem like the ultimate destination. Who wouldn't want to live in a place where the beaches are beautiful, the coffee is always on point, and there's something exciting happening every day. But the truth is, the reality of living in these big cities is often very different from what you might expect. Let's start with the high costs. If you plan on living in a big city like Sydney or Melbourne, you better be ready to shell out some serious cash. Rent is the biggest expense for most people. In Sydney, for example, it's almost impossible to find a decent apartment for under $2,000 a month unless you're willing to live in a small shared space far away from the city center. Even a room in a shared house can cost you around $150 to $400 a week, depending on the area. That's a huge chunk of your budget gone just for a place to sleep. And it doesn't get any better when you consider other costs like food, transportation, and entertainment. Food is expensive too, especially if you're eating out. A casual meal at a restaurant could set you back anywhere between $10 to $20, and that's not even factoring in the drinks. And if you want to get your groceries, be prepared to pay more than you might expect. Fresh produce can cost a lot, and eating healthy here often means paying more for organic or imported goods. And when you're trying to live on a budget, these costs add up quickly. Transportation is another area where the costs pile up. If you don't have a car, public transport is your best option. But even the cost of a monthly pass in cities like Sydney can cost over $150, and that's just for getting around. In addition, the traffic in these cities is horrible. If you do have a car, be prepared to spend a lot on fuel and parking fees. Driving in Sydney can be a nightmare with high petrol prices, toll roads, and expensive parking spots. But here's the kicker. All of these costs can leave you with very little left over for anything else, like going out, having fun, or even saving money. While you're out there living the dream, you might be constantly worrying about how you're going to cover rent for the next month or whether you'll be able to afford your next meal. The dream of living in Australia's big cities can quickly turn into a financial struggle if you don't have a stable income or a backup plan. The city lifestyle can be exciting, but it's also incredibly expensive, and that's something you won't fully understand until you're living it. And it's not just the high costs that make city living tough for travelers. Job opportunities can be limited as well, especially if you're only looking for short-term or casual work. While the big cities may have a lot of job openings, many of them are filled by locals who have more experience or better understanding of the job market. As a backpacker or traveler, you might find yourself competing for the same low-paying part-time jobs as hundreds of other people. In fact, you'll probably find more backpackers hustling for jobs than you will surfers riding the waves on Bondi Beach. The competition for work is fierce, and it can be difficult to find a job that pays enough to cover your high living expenses. But what about life outside the big cities? That's where things start to get a little different. While the big cities are known for their glamour and excitement, smaller towns and rural areas in Australia offer a completely different lifestyle. Sure, they might not have the same iconic landmarks or trendy coffee shops, but life in these areas is much more affordable, and you'll find that your $1,000 budget stretches much further. Rent is cheaper, food costs less, and transportation is more manageable. You might even find that the slower pace of life gives you the chance to relax, enjoy nature, and truly immerse yourself in the Australian way of life. In places like Tasmania, Adelaide, or even rural Queensland, you'll find a more relaxed atmosphere where people focus more on community and less on the hustle and bustle of the big city. The cost of living is lower, and you're more likely to find work that's suited to your skill set, especially in industries like agriculture, tourism, and hospitality. Plus, the pressure of city life fades away, and you might find yourself enjoying simple pleasures like hiking in the bush or exploring the quiet beaches that don't come with crowds of tourists. In fact, many people who start their Aussie adventure in the big cities end up relocating to smaller towns or the outback. The reality is that city living can be tough on your wallet, and when you're on a tight budget, you start to appreciate the simpler things in life. If you're looking for a peaceful, affordable life with a stronger sense of community, the outback or smaller towns might be the perfect fit for you. To sum it up, the glamour of Australia's big cities comes with a hefty price tag. Living in Sydney or Melbourne may sound like a dream, but it's a dream that requires deep pockets, patience, and the ability to hustle hard just to keep up. The costs are high, the job market is tough, and the lifestyle can leave you feeling drained if you're not prepared. But on the other hand, life in smaller towns and rural areas offers a more affordable and laid-back lifestyle, where your $10,000 budget can actually get you further. In the end, it all comes down to what you're looking for. Are you after the glamour and excitement of the big city, or the peace and simplicity of life in the outback? It's a tough choice, but one that every traveler must make when they come to Australia. The dark side. Drugs and parties. Australia is often portrayed as the land of sunshine, beaches, and adventure. But there's another side to it that many people don't talk about: the underground party culture and the prevalence of drug use. While you might come to Australia looking for fun, exciting experiences, you'll quickly realize that the party scene here can sometimes come with a darker, more dangerous side. In cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, the nightlife is alive with energy. But it's also filled with substances that can easily turn a fun night into a risky or life-changing experience. Let's talk numbers first. A shocking statistic. Australia has one of the highest rates of drug use among developed countries. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, nearly 15% of Australians have used illicit drugs in the past year, with the most commonly used substances being cannabis, ecstasy, and methamphetamines. And this is just the legal statistics. It's important to remember that many people don't talk about their use, and these numbers are likely higher. While drugs may seem like an occasional thing for some, in Australia, they're often part of the party culture. Whether it's in bars, clubs, or even house parties, drugs are accessible and openly used in many social settings. Now, I'm not saying that every Aussie is walking around with a joint in their hand or a pill tucked away in their pocket. But the reality is that drugs are a part of the Australian party scene. Nightlife here can often feel like it revolves around substance use. Whether it's popping a pill to keep up with the party or using something stronger to escape the daily grind, the influence of drugs is impossible to ignore. The high energy and constant partying in the cities make it easier to get caught up in this lifestyle. You walk into a bar and the air is thick with something that isn't just beer. You can smell the mix of smoke, alcohol, and something else in the air. It hits you as soon as you walk through the door. People aren't just drinking here, they're also looking for a buzz, something to take the edge off or enhance their night. But while the party scene might seem carefree and full of fun, the truth is that there are dark consequences that come with it. Many people in Australia, particularly in big cities, get caught up in the cycle of substance abuse, which can lead to serious health problems, legal issues, and even addiction. The more people use drugs, the more likely it is that they'll get into dangerous situations, whether it's a fight, a bad trip, or worse. The carefree vibe that you experience in the city hides the risks that many face when drugs and alcohol are involved. For some, partying is a way to escape personal struggles, but it quickly becomes a destructive pattern. Living on a tight budget in Australia only makes things more complicated. You might think that having fun and partying would come easy in a place like this, but when you're on $1,000 a month, there's barely enough room to pay for rent, food, and transport, let alone a drug habit. And yet, despite the financial challenges, there are plenty of people in the cities who seem to make it work. I remember chatting with a backpacker in Sydney who had been living there for several months. He was barely scraping by, but somehow he managed to go out every weekend and keep up with the party crowd. He confessed that he'd been spending more money on substances than he should have, even though he couldn't afford it. "It's just what people do here," he said. "You can't go out without something to take." And honestly, that's one of the most alarming things about the Australian party scene. It's almost expected. If you want to fit in, you need to keep up with the crowd, and for many, that means partaking in drugs or alcohol. It's a cycle that can be hard to break, especially when it's tied to the social scene. The people I met were fun, lively, and full of energy, but they were also exhausted from constantly trying to maintain that high. Partying in Australia might look like fun, but the reality is that it can be a dangerous and expensive lifestyle. But let's have a bit of fun with this. While people are out there spending their money on substances and partying every weekend, it's important to remember that living on $1,000 a month doesn't leave room for much else. Living on $1,000 doesn't leave room for a drug habit. But who's counting? Right? The reality is that if you're surviving on that kind of budget, the most you're spending on your weekend is the bus fare to get to the next house party and maybe a cheap drink at the bar. No luxury here. But even so, there's a certain weirdness to how people on a budget often still find a way to party like they are rich. Drugs, alcohol, and late-night hangouts become a part of your routine just to keep up with the crowd. And despite the financial struggle, the desire to fit in can push people to make choices they otherwise wouldn't make. So, while the party scene in Australia is exciting and full of energy, there's no denying that it comes with its own risks. The drugs, the late nights, the constant buzz. Sometimes it's easy to forget that it's not all fun and games. The dark side of this lifestyle can lead to addiction, health issues, and serious consequences that last much longer than the high. Australia's party culture may seem glamorous on the surface, but once you dig a little deeper, you realize that it's often a dangerous game people are playing. If you're looking to live the good life in Australia, remember that it's not just about the parties. It's about the choices you make and the consequences they bring. The lonely heart of Australia. Australia might seem like the perfect place to make new friends and enjoy a social life, but here is a surprising truth. It can also be one of the loneliest places you'll ever experience. Despite being surrounded by millions of people, many people, both locals and travelers, find themselves feeling incredibly isolated. It's strange, right? You're in a country full of vibrant cities, beautiful landscapes, and lively beaches, yet somehow, loneliness seems to follow you around. It's almost like an invisible weight on your shoulders, no matter how many people are around. You might think that Australia, with its welcoming attitude, stunning natural beauty, and beach lifestyle, would be the perfect place to connect with others. But the reality is different. Sure, Australians are known for their friendly and relaxed demeanor. They're generally easy to talk to and open, especially if you're a tourist. But even with that laid-back culture, people here still struggle with loneliness. It's not something that's talked about much, but loneliness is a serious issue in Australia. Studies show that loneliness affects a significant portion of the population. According to the Australian Psychological Society, about 1 in 4 Australians report feeling lonely on a regular basis, despite living in one of the most socially active countries. It is not just the elderly or people living in rural areas either. Even in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne, loneliness is common, especially among young people. Isn't it funny how being surrounded by millions of people can still make you feel like you're the only one at the party? You could be at a packed bar, chatting with strangers, and still feel disconnected. Or you might find yourself sitting on a beach, looking at the waves, and feeling a sense of isolation that seems impossible to shake off. That's the reality of life in Australia for many people. The truth is, despite all the social opportunities, making real connections can be surprisingly hard. Everyone seems busy, always caught up in their own lives, and that can leave you feeling like an outsider. Even in a country that prides itself on its social nature, it's not always easy to find people who you truly connect with. And it's not just about having friends. For many people, the loneliness comes from not having a close-knit community or family nearby. Most travelers in Australia are far away from their families and familiar support systems. And even though you're surrounded by other people, that feeling of missing home can create a gap that's hard to fill. The distance between you and the people who matter the most can make everything feel emptier, even if you're living in a city full of people. I've talked to a lot of travelers who came to Australia with big dreams of making friends, experiencing the social culture, and living that laid-back beach lifestyle. But after a few months, many found themselves lonely and longing for something deeper than casual chats with strangers. One backpacker I met in Melbourne told me, "I came here thinking I'd meet tons of people, but all I've done is party and talk to people I'll never see again. It gets exhausting, and after a while, you just feel like you're floating by yourself in a sea of faces." It's a common experience for many newcomers to the country. Everyone is busy working, traveling, or moving around, and it becomes harder to form meaningful, lasting connections when people come and go so quickly. And it's not just the tourists who feel this way. Locals, especially young Australians, can feel isolated in their own cities. The high cost of living, long working hours, and the constant chase for career success leave many people feeling disconnected, despite the bustling city life around them. Even though Australians are often seen as outgoing and friendly, there's a deeper layer of loneliness beneath the surface. It's ironic that in one of the most developed countries in the world, with access to social media and technology, people still struggle to form real, meaningful connections. Part of this loneliness also comes from the size of the country. Australia is vast, with wide open spaces and areas that feel endless. The sheer distance between cities and towns can make it hard to feel truly connected to people. If you're living in a smaller town or in a rural area, the isolation can feel even more intense. Traveling through these remote areas can sometimes feel like you're the only one around. And even in larger cities, the endless roads and sprawling suburbs can leave you feeling small and unnoticed. There's also the reality of what we think of as the perfect social life. On social media, we see Australians living carefree lives, going to beach parties, having barbecues with friends, and enjoying sunny afternoons in the park. It looks like the perfect social scene, but what's often left out of the picture is the loneliness that sometimes comes with it. Everyone is so busy showing off the good times, the beach selfies, the perfect sunset, the night out with friends, but we rarely see the moments of loneliness that happen behind the scenes. In the quest to be constantly social, people forget that sometimes true connection takes more than just a smile and a drink. It takes time, effort, and mutual understanding. And in a busy place like Australia, those connections can be hard to come by. The loneliness that many people experience in Australia isn't something that's unique to just travelers. It's a bigger issue, and it affects people of all ages and backgrounds. So, while the country may seem like paradise with its sunny weather, beautiful landscapes, and fun social scene, it's also important to acknowledge the emotional and social challenges that come with living here. Despite all the social events, parties, and opportunities, finding real connection can still be a struggle. Loneliness is often hiding in plain sight, and it's something that many people deal with silently. It's a reminder that even in paradise, the heart can still feel a little empty. In the end, Australia may offer the stunning beaches and lively cities that everyone dreams about. But don't be fooled. Loneliness is just as real here as anywhere else. It's not always about being alone in a room. Sometimes it's about feeling disconnected, even when you're surrounded by people. And if you're someone who's far from home, trying to navigate a new place, you might find that even in the middle of Australia's biggest cities, you can still feel like you're the only one at the party. The backpacker dream. Reality check. When people think of backpackers in Australia, they often imagine carefree travelers who spend their days surfing at Bondi Beach, hiking through national parks, and living off the joy of spontaneous adventures. It's easy to picture a life full of freedom, new friends, and endless excitement. But the reality of the backpacker lifestyle in Australia is far from the glamorous image that the media and social media often paint. Instead of sunny beach days and spontaneous road trips, many backpackers face long hours in low-paying jobs, cramped hostels, and a constant cycle of moving from place to place, all while struggling to make ends meet. I came to Australia with the same dream. I thought I'd be living a carefree life, waking up to the sound of the ocean, exploring the Great Barrier Reef, and meeting interesting people from all over the world. But instead, I found myself working long shifts at a cafe just to afford another night in a cheap hostel. The dream of living freely on a beach quickly turned into the reality of serving coffee to tourists, hustling for tips, and trying to figure out how I was going to pay for my next meal. Far from the picture-perfect life I had imagined, it became a constant balancing act between work and survival. Backpacking in Australia sounds simple enough. Work a bit, travel a bit, and enjoy the freedom. But the truth is that freedom comes with a hefty price. One of the first things I learned was that you didn't get to stay in luxurious hotels or rent cute beachfront apartments when you were living the backpacker life. Instead, you're bouncing between hostels, often sharing a room with a dozen strangers, dealing with the awkwardness of bad roommates and managing hostel drama. You'd think it would be easy to make friends in a hostel, but the reality is that it can often feel more like a temporary home than a place for lasting connections. Hostel life is filled with ups and downs. I once had a roommate who snored louder than a freight train, while another would leave their clothes everywhere. A third roommate seemed to think it was okay to blast music at 2 a.m. If you're lucky, you might find a group of cool people to hang out with, but more often than not, you end up dealing with the kind of hostel drama that only backpackers can truly understand. There's always someone who hogs the bathroom or takes too long in the shower. And let's not even get started on the kitchen wares. If you're sharing a small kitchen with 20 other people, things can get tense fast. And then there's the work. When you're a backpacker on a working holiday visa in Australia, you're often stuck with low-paying, casual jobs just to make enough money to keep going. I spent months working as a barista, which I actually enjoyed for a while, but the hours were long, the pay was minimal, and the tips didn't always make up for it. The pressure to work as much as possible while still finding time to travel and see the country can be exhausting. The problem with this constant juggling act is that you can never fully relax. You're either working hard to save up money or working hard to avoid running out of it. And even if you manage to get a decent job, it doesn't always last. Many backpackers bounce from job to job, hoping to find something that pays a little better or offers a more stable schedule. But in reality, the search for good work can be frustrating. You might spend weeks sending out resumes, getting a few odd jobs, and constantly worrying about what's next. There's always that feeling of uncertainty hanging over you, and it can make the whole experience feel like one big hustle just to stay afloat. You quickly learn that being a backpacker isn't as carefree as it sounds. It is more like a never-ending series of compromises. I had a friend who worked in a fruit-picking job for a few weeks. While the pay was decent, the work was physically demanding, and the conditions weren't always great. She spent her days under the hot Australian sun, picking fruit for hours on end, and by the end of the day, her body ached in ways she didn't expect. But despite the hard work, she stuck with it because it was the only way she could afford to travel. That is the harsh reality of being a backpacker. You end up taking whatever work you can find, even if it's not the dream job you thought you'd be doing. Backpacking might sound like an exciting adventure, and for some, it can be. But there's another side to it that most people don't see. It's not all about meeting new people and partying in exotic places. Sometimes it's about working long hours for a little bit of money, living in cramped conditions with strangers, and struggling to find stability. You quickly learn that the dream isn't always as easy as it seems. But there are, of course, funny moments and things that make it all worth it. Sometimes the frustration of dealing with bad roommates or working tough jobs can turn into funny stories you'll tell for years. You'll look back at those moments and laugh, even though they were tough at the time. And despite all the struggles, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing you made it through the tough parts and still got to see some of the most beautiful parts of Australia. At the end of the day, the backpacker dream is not without its challenges. It's about finding balance between work and play, saving and spending, and surviving and enjoying. It's not as carefree as it seems, and while you might not be living on the beach or partying every night, you'll gain something even more valuable: the experience of navigating life on your own terms, making it work, and creating memories that will last a lifetime. ESX, drugs, and no real connection. Australia is known for its laid-back lifestyle, beautiful beaches, and sunny weather. But there's another side to the Aussie way of life that doesn't get as much attention: the casual hookup culture and widespread drug use. It's a country where the party never seems to end, and where sex and drugs are often seen as quick fixes for the deeper, more meaningful connections that people long for. What starts as a fun night out can quickly turn into a cycle of emptiness, where people use substances or temporary relationships to fill a void that never seems to go away. Let's talk about the hookup culture in Australia. In many ways, it's become a normal part of the social scene, especially for younger generations. The idea of casual sex, one-night stands, and no-strings-attached relationships has become pretty common, especially in big cities like Sydney and Melbourne. You can go out to a club, meet someone new, and end up in their bed before the night's over. It sounds exciting, and for many it is, at least in the moment. But the problem is, it's rarely satisfying in the long term. While sex is easy to come by, genuine emotional connections are harder to find. And as people get caught up in this pattern of casual encounters, they can end up feeling more alone than ever. Research shows that younger generations, especially those in their 20s and 30s, are facing a growing sense of disconnection, even though they're more connected than ever through social apps and online platforms. The rise of dating apps like Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge has made meeting new people as easy as swiping left or right. But ironically, it's also made it harder to form real, lasting connections. With so many options at your fingertips, it's easy to treat people as disposable, jumping from one person to the next without taking the time to build something meaningful. According to a study by the Australian Psychological Society, more young Australians report feeling isolated and disconnected than ever before, despite the constant digital connections. It's a paradox. We're more connected than ever, but somehow we're more alone. This disconnection is often fueled by the culture of instant gratification. In a society where everything is available at the touch of a button, it's tempting to turn to sex and drugs as a way to avoid dealing with deeper emotions. When you're living in the fast lane, it's easy to numb yourself to feelings of loneliness, insecurity, or fear. And that's where drugs come in. Whether it's recreational drugs at a party or the occasional pill to keep the night going, many people in Australia use substances to escape. Drugs like ecstasy or meth are often part of the party scene, and for some, they become a way to enhance social experiences, making them feel more connected to the people around them. But in reality, these substances often do the opposite. They create a temporary high that fades quickly, leaving people feeling empty and disconnected once the buzz wears off. I remember meeting a guy at a party who was clearly having the time of his life. He was dancing, laughing, and talking to everyone. But when the music stopped and the lights came on, it was clear that something was missing. He turned to me and said, "It's funny, isn't it? I've been out here partying for months, meeting all these people, but it feels like I haven't really connected with anyone. Sometimes I feel more alone than I did before I came to Australia." His words stuck with me because they revealed something I hadn't fully understood before. The emptiness that can come with the constant search for the next thrill, the next person, the next high. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the moment, but when that moment passes, you're left with the same feeling of loneliness you were trying to avoid in the first place. The use of sex and drugs as substitutes for real connections is not limited to one person or one experience. It's something I've seen time and time again in my travels around Australia. I've met people who, on the surface, seem to be living the dream, having fun, meeting new people, and going out every weekend. But when you dig a little deeper, it's clear that these experiences aren't fulfilling. One woman I spoke with confessed, "I've hooked up with so many guys here, but I still don't feel like I've found someone who gets me. It's fun, but at the end of the day, I'm just looking for something real." It's a sentiment that I heard from so many others. They were having fun, but they weren't really happy. And then there's the humor in all of this. As you navigate the world of one-night stands and endless parties, you start to see the pattern. You might not find your soulmate, but you'll find a lot of people willing to help you forget you were looking for one. It's funny, but also a little sad. The hookup culture can be exhilarating, but it's not a substitute for real connection. Sex and drugs can make you feel good in the moment, but they don't address the underlying emotional needs that we all have. Australia, EC, culture of casual sex and drug use has created a generation of people who are often more focused on the surface-level experiences than on building meaningful relationships. While the party scene might seem like endless fun, It can also leave people feeling hollow, as though they were stuck in a cycle of temporary pleasure without anything substantial to hold on to. The desire for real connection is there, but it's often overshadowed by the need for instant gratification and fleeting experiences. It's a reminder that while it's easy to get lost in the excitement of the party scene, the true challenge lies in finding real, lasting connections in a world that values the quick, the easy, and the momentary. The price of drugs and partying. A financial breakdown. Australia is often seen as a land of endless sunshine, vibrant beaches, and an exciting party culture. And for many, the idea of living here is wrapped up in images of carefree nights spent dancing in clubs, meeting new people, and having a blast. But while partying is certainly part of the Aussie lifestyle, it comes with a hefty price tag that can quickly eat away at your budget, especially if you're living on just $1,000 a month. A typical night out in Australia isn't cheap. First, there's the cost of getting in. Entry fees to clubs or bars can range anywhere from $10 to $30, depending on the venue and whether there's a special event. And let's not forget about drinks. A cocktail can easily cost you $15 to $20, and if you're out with friends, you're probably having more than one. By the time you've bought a few drinks, you're already down a significant chunk of change. On top of that, if drugs are involved in the scene, you're looking at even higher costs. A single pill of ecstasy can cost between $30 to $50, and that's just for one night. If you're out regularly, these costs add up fast, and suddenly, your $1,000 budget starts feeling more like $100. When you're living on a tight budget, the cost of partying can quickly undermine everything you're trying to accomplish. You might think you're only spending a little at the time, but when you factor in the cost of entry, drinks, transportation, and possibly drugs, it becomes clear that a night out can cost you more than you realize. If you go out a few times a week, you could easily end up spending hundreds of dollars in just a month, money that could have gone toward rent, food, or other essentials. And if you're living on a tight budget of $1,000, spending that much on partying means you'll be struggling to afford the things that actually matter. I can speak from experience. There was one time I went out with some friends, thinking it would be just another casual night. But by the time I added up the cost of entry, drinks, and some random purchases throughout the night, I realized I had spent my entire week's grocery budget. Worth it? Well, let's just say I don't remember most of it. The next day, I had to get creative with what I could make from the few ingredients I had left in my kitchen. Instead of buying fresh vegetables, I ended up eating instant noodles for the next 3 days. It wasn't glamorous, but it was definitely a lesson learned the hard way. That one night out ended up costing me more than I could afford, and the consequences were felt throughout the week. The problem is that partying often becomes a regular habit, and when you're in a social scene where everyone else is doing it, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement and forget about your budget. According to a survey conducted by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Australians aged 18 to 34 spend an average of $12.4 billion on alcohol each year, and a significant portion of this spending is tied to partying and social drinking. If you add in the cost of drugs, transportation, and other social expenses, it's no wonder that people living in cities like Sydney and Melbourne find themselves constantly struggling to make ends meet, even with a decent income. For backpackers or people on a $1,000 budget, this kind of spending is even more unsustainable. The truth is, the money spent on partying can quickly spiral out of control. You might think it's just a small indulgence here and there, but when you add it all up, you realize that it's a huge drain on your finances. A night out can easily cost more than a week's worth of groceries, and when you're trying to survive on a small budget, that makes a big difference. For many backpackers and young travelers, the temptation to party and let loose can seem irresistible. But when you wake up the next day with a hangover, empty pockets, and an empty fridge, the fun doesn't seem as worth it anymore. The biggest issue here is that partying and drug use can quickly become a cycle. You go out to have fun, spend money you don't have, and then find yourself stuck in a situation where you have to figure out how to make it through the next few days or weeks. This cycle can drain your energy, your bank account, and your motivation to save or plan for the future. When you're living paycheck to paycheck or on a tight budget, this lifestyle can leave you in constant financial stress, even if the night out itself seemed harmless at the time. In the end, it all comes down to priorities. Partying might seem like the highlight of life in Australia, but when you're living on a budget, you have to make smarter choices about how you spend your money. The high of a night out might be fleeting, but the impact it has on your bank account can last a lot longer. The key is finding balance, enjoying yourself when you can, but knowing when to say no and save for what truly matters. Living on $1,000 a month in Australia means you can afford to let partying drain your funds. You'll need to be more mindful of where your money goes and how you spend it, whether that's cutting back on nights out or finding ways to socialize without spending a fortune. While a night out might feel like an escape, the reality is that the cost of partying and drug use can quickly chip away at your budget, leaving you with fewer resources to live the life you want. So, the next time you're debating whether to go out, think about the long-term impact. Is it really worth sacrificing your budget for one more round? The Australian outback. An escape from it all? Australia's big cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, are the places where most people dream of living. They're full of life, culture, and excitement, but they also come with their fair share of problems, like high living costs, busy streets, and a constant rush. If you're living on a budget, the high cost of living in these cities can be overwhelming, and it often leaves you wondering if there's a simpler, more affordable way of life somewhere else in the country. This is where the Australian outback and rural towns come into play. The outback isn't just about vast deserts and endless heat, it's also home to some of the most beautiful and peaceful landscapes in Australia. From the wide open spaces to the breathtaking sunsets, the outback offers a level of serenity that's hard to find in the hustle and bustle of big cities. Life here moves at a much slower pace, with fewer distractions, which can feel like a breath of fresh air compared to the constant noise and busyness of city life. For many, the outback offers an escape from the pressure to always be on the go, to always be working or socializing. In rural areas, you can truly embrace a quieter lifestyle, where the focus is less on material things and more on the simple joys of life. The beauty of the Australian outback is undeniable. Picture-wide, endless horizons, colorful red dirt, and vast, clear skies that seem to go on forever. The stillness of the landscape offers a unique sense of peace that many city dwellers yearn for but can find in the crowded, noisy cities. Small rural towns are often surrounded by nature, where you were more likely to see kangaroos hopping by or hear the wind rustling through the trees than the constant hum of traffic or sirens. This sense of space and quiet is something many people don't realize they're missing until they get out of the city and experience it firsthand. In addition to the peace and beauty, the cost of living in rural areas is significantly lower than in the big cities. Rent is cheaper, groceries cost less, and things like transportation and entertainment are more affordable. If you're struggling to survive on a tight budget in a place like Sydney or Melbourne, moving to a quieter, more affordable rural town could be a game changer. For example, in places like Tasmania, the Northern Territory, or even parts of Queensland, you can rent a house or apartment for a fraction of the price you would pay in the city. This can give you the breathing room to actually enjoy life instead of constantly stressing about paying your rent or bills. I've spoken to several people who made the decision to leave the busy cities behind and move to rural parts of Australia. One backpacker I met in Tasmania told me that moving to the outback was the best decision they ever made. After a year of struggling to make ends meet in Melbourne, they decided to relocate to a small town on the island. The cost of living here is so much lower, they explained. I rent a house for the price I was paying for a room in the city, and the people are friendly and down to earth. I actually have time to enjoy life now instead of just working to survive. It was refreshing to hear someone speak so highly of the simpler, quieter life that the outback provides. Another person I met was a couple who had been living in Sydney for years but decided to make the switch to rural Queensland. They said that the constant hustle in Sydney made them feel like they were always running on empty. We loved the city, but after a while the stress and cost of living just wore us down. We wanted more space, more time, and more peace, they told me. Since moving to a smaller town, they've found that not only is their cost of living much lower, but they also have more free time to enjoy their surroundings. They're able to go hiking, take weekend trips to the coast, and actually relax without the pressure of a big city lifestyle. One of the biggest advantages of living in the rural areas is the sense of community that often comes with it. In smaller towns, people tend to know each other, and there's a stronger sense of connection. It's easier to build relationships when everyone is more laid back and open. Unlike in big cities, where it's common to pass strangers on the street without a second thought, rural towns often foster a deeper sense of belonging. This can be a huge relief for anyone feeling isolated or disconnected in the busy city life. However, it's important to understand that life in rural Australia isn't always perfect. While the cost of living may be lower, the job market in smaller towns can be limited, especially for those in specialized fields. Many rural areas rely on industries like agriculture, tourism, or hospitality, which may not offer as many opportunities for people with more diverse or urban-focused skill sets. That being said, people often find ways to make it work, whether through remote work, local employment, or even starting their own businesses. The slower pace of life in the outback gives people the chance to take risks and explore new possibilities that might be harder to do in the fast-moving city environment. When comparing rural life to city life, the contrast is clear. Cities like Sydney and Melbourne are vibrant, energetic, and full of opportunities, but they also come with high living costs, stress, and a feeling of being constantly busy. On the other hand, rural areas offer peace, affordability, and a more laid-back lifestyle, but they may require more adjustments, such as a different type of work or a smaller social scene. For many people, moving to the outback or a smaller town in Australia is a way to balance the financial struggles of city life with the peace and simplicity that come with living closer to nature. The choice ultimately depends on what you value most. If you thrive on excitement, the buzz of a big city, and the endless options available, then city life may be for you. But if you're looking for more space peace and the chance to live life at a slower pace without the financial burden of high living costs, then the Australian outback or rural towns could be the escape you've been looking for. Life in the outback may not be for everyone, but for those who are ready to embrace its beauty and simplicity, it can be the perfect solution to the chaos of city living. The struggle to adapt. Making $1,000 work in Australia. Living in Australia on a budget of $1,000 a month sounds tough, and, well, it is. The high cost of living, especially in big cities like Sydney and Melbourne, can quickly eat away at your limited funds. But it's not impossible. With some smart choices and a bit of planning, it's possible to survive and even thrive on a budget in Australia. The key is knowing where to cut costs, where to find extra income, and how to manage your money wisely. One of the first things you'll need to do is find cheaper accommodation. Rent is often the biggest expense, so finding affordable housing is essential. If you're living in a city, consider sharing a room in a house or flat instead of renting a private apartment. Shared housing is much cheaper, and it's a great way to meet new people, especially if you're a backpacker or new to the country. You can find these kinds of arrangements on websites like Flatmates, Commuter.au, or through local Facebook groups where people post about available rooms. If you're really trying to keep costs down, you might want to consider moving to a less expensive area, even if it's a bit farther from the city center. It might take you longer to commute, but the rent savings can be worth it. For those who don't mind the adventure, consider living in a hostel. While not glamorous, hostels can be a cheap and social option. Many hostels also offer discounts for longer stays, and some even provide work for accommodation opportunities, which means you can work a few hours a week in exchange for a place to sleep. This can significantly reduce your living expenses, and it's a great way to meet other travelers who might be in the same situation as you. Just remember, hostels aren't always the quietest places to live, but they can be an affordable solution while you figure out your next move. Another way to stretch your $1,000 is by cutting unnecessary expenses. And this means being mindful of your spending, especially when it comes to things like food, transportation, and entertainment. Cooking at home is one of the best ways to save money. Instead of eating out, make simple meals that are affordable and nutritious. Instant noodles might become your best friend, and while they're not gourmet, they're cheap and quick. You'll probably end up eating them a lot, but you can always spice them up with vegetables or protein if you want to mix it up a bit. Plus, grocery shopping at local markets can be cheaper than buying from large supermarket chains, so try to shop around for the best deals. Transportation is another area where you can save. If you're living in a city, take advantage of public transport instead of driving a car. In places like Sydney, a monthly transport pass can be a much cheaper option than owning a car, especially when you factor in petrol, insurance, and parking fees. If you're in a rural area or smaller town, consider cycling or walking when possible. Not only does this save money, but it's also a great way to stay fit. When it comes to entertainment, be creative. Instead of spending money on nights out or expensive activities, look for free or low-cost things to do. Many cities in Australia offer free events like outdoor concerts, community markets, and festivals. If you're in a more rural area, take advantage of the natural beauty around you. Hiking, swimming at local beaches, or having a picnic in the park are all free and fun ways to spend your time. And don't forget about the amazing outdoors Australia has to offer, from beaches to national parks, many of which are free to visit. Picking up side gigs is another way to boost your income while living on a tight budget. Working in hospitality, like cafes or restaurants, is a popular option for travelers, and the pay is often decent, especially when you factor in tips. If you're lucky enough to have some skills, like photography, writing, or graphic design, consider freelancing or offering services online. There are plenty of websites where you can find short-term gigs, and the extra income can help cover some of your expenses. If you're really in a pinch, you might also want to try odd jobs like dog walking, babysitting, or tutoring. These side jobs won't make you rich, but they can provide a little extra cushion to get by. Living on $1,000 a month in Australia requires mental and emotional resilience. It's not easy to live on a tight budget, and there will be times when you feel frustrated or overwhelmed. It can be hard to watch your friends go out and enjoy themselves when you can only afford to join in. Or you might feel like you are stuck in a cycle of working just to pay rent and bills. But the key to surviving on a small budget is to stay focused on your goals. Whether you're traveling, studying, or just trying to get by, remind yourself that this is temporary. You might be struggling now, but with time and effort, things will get better. The emotional aspect of living on a budget can be tough, but it's also a learning experience. You'll learn how to be more resourceful, how to plan ahead, and how to live a simpler life. And while it's not always fun, the sense of accomplishment that comes with making it work on a limited budget can be incredibly rewarding. You might not have the money for expensive luxuries, but you'll gain a sense of independence and resilience that will last long after you leave Australia. To sum up, living on $1,000 a month in Australia is a challenge, but it's not impossible. By finding cheaper accommodation, cutting unnecessary expenses, picking up side gigs, and focusing on simple pleasures, you can survive, and even thrive, on a tight budget. It won't always be easy, and there will be times when you wish you could just relax and not worry about money. But with a little creativity, resilience, and a sense of humor, you'll make it work. After all, you'll be eating instant noodles, a lot, but at least you'll be able to say you survived living in one of the world's most expensive countries on a shoestring budget. Is it worth it? So, after everything we've discussed, the costs of living, the party culture, and the loneliness that often accompanies it, the big question remains: can you actually live in Australia for just $1,000 a month? Is it even possible, or is it a fantasy that only the lucky few can achieve? Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. First, let's talk about the cost of living. Australia is known for its high living expenses, especially in big cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Rent alone can easily eat up most of your budget, with a small shared room costing anywhere between $150 to $400 per week, depending on the area. Then add in the cost of food, transportation, and basic living expenses, and your $1,000 budget starts to feel stretched thin. Then there's the party scene. The social culture in Australia, especially for younger people, revolves around partying, drinking, and enjoying the nightlife. While this can be fun and exciting, it also comes with a hefty price tag. A night out can easily cost you $50 to $100 or more, especially when you factor in drinks, entry fees, and transportation. And if you're partaking in the party scene regularly, you might find that it's hard to balance your social life with your financial reality. Drugs and alcohol are often part of this culture, which can make the costs even higher. If you're on a tight budget, the temptation to spend on these social experiences can quickly add up and undermine your savings. It is not just about the fun. It is about how quickly the money drains when you reliving paycheck to paycheck. The real question becomes, is the excitement of partying worth the financial strain? Lastly, we have loneliness. Despite the sunny beaches and vibrant social life, Australia can be a surprisingly lonely place. You might be surrounded by thousands of people, but many find it difficult to build meaningful relationships. Backpackers and travelers often experience this firsthand, as they move from hostel to hostel or work a few short-term jobs in different cities, never truly settling in. Even Australians themselves report high levels of loneliness, especially in big cities where people can be too busy with their own lives to connect with others. If you're living on $1,000 a month, you're likely going to feel the weight of loneliness more acutely. You can't afford to go out as much, and with limited social connections, the isolation can become more pronounced. So, can you really live in Australia for $1,000 a month? Yes, it's possible, but it's not for the faint-hearted. The key to surviving on such a tight budget is making sacrifices and embracing a lifestyle that is centered around survival, not luxury. You'll need to find cheaper accommodation, work multiple jobs, and cut back on socializing to make ends meet. You'll have to embrace the grind, constantly hustling to find work or side gigs, and making do with very little. You'll likely feel the pressure of financial stress more than once, especially when it comes to things like rent, food, and transportation. But with the right mindset and a willingness to adapt, it's doable. However, it's also important to remember that living on $1,000 in Australia isn't sustainable in the long term for everyone. While it might be manageable for a short period, perhaps during a backpacking trip or if you are only staying in Australia for a limited time, it is not an ideal way of life for the long haul. Constantly working to make ends meet, struggling with loneliness, and limiting your social activities can take a toll on your mental and emotional well-being. There's only so much you can sacrifice before the grind becomes overwhelming. In conclusion, living in Australia on $1,000 is a challenging yet achievable goal, but it's not easy. You'll need to embrace a minimalist lifestyle, where you cut out unnecessary expenses, work hard to earn extra cash, and focus on the essentials. You'll also need to be resilient, as loneliness and financial stress are likely to become part of your everyday life. But if you can handle the grind, adapt to the challenges, and balance the highs with the inevitable lows, it's possible to survive. Just be prepared to sacrifice a lot, especially when it comes to enjoying the social life or living in the heart of the big cities. Living in Australia on $1,000 isn't the carefree paradise you might expect. But with the right mindset and careful planning, it's a lifestyle that can work. For a while, at least. So, what do you think? Could you survive in Australia for just $1,000 a month? It's definitely a tough challenge, but for some, it's doable. From living in cheaper areas to picking up extra jobs, it takes a lot of planning, sacrifice, and flexibility. Your feedback can help others who are in the same boat. If you've had a similar experience, your story could be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And don't forget, in the next episode, we're going to dive into how some Aussies are making it work with even less money. How do they survive in Australia when the budget is even tighter? Stay tuned to find out. You won't want to miss it. We really want to keep this conversation going, so feel free to share this video with friends who dreamed of moving to Australia or are curious about life here on a budget. Whether you've been here for years or are planning a visit, we'd love to hear your perspective. Remember, living in Australia doesn't have to be a dream that is out of reach. It's about finding ways to make it work, no matter the budget. Tell us what you think, and we'll keep exploring how to live and thrive in this beautiful country, no matter what your wallet says.